In today's video, I'll make this cool wooden camera that I designed in Shaper 3D. Hopefully by the end, I'll have a few half-decent photos to show for it. I'll get straight into it and I'll start by preparing this piece of black wattle. I'm not sure if you already know, but I used to be a photographer before starting on YouTube. That was all digital though, so I've never actually worked in a darkroom. I'm pretty excited to give it a go, and I'm hoping that by trying out this very basic form of photography, it'll inspire me to get back into taking a few photos and maybe make me a better photographer from the experience. Anyway, when I designed the camera, I did my usual thing of creating something purely on how I want it to look, with total disregard to how to actually make it. And then afterwards, I work out how I can make that happen. I decided to use segmented parts, so that's what I'm cutting here. I'll then glue them together and shape them afterwards. I should say at this point that this project is way over the top, but I like the design and I really wanted to make it. It'll be a pinhole camera, the most basic camera there is, and all the work that I'm going to do really isn't necessary at all. A cardboard box with a pinhole is all that's needed and would produce just as good a photo. I really like using Shaper 3D to design my projects, and it makes it super easy to print out templates. The front of the camera will be curved, and again, not needed at all. A regular rectangle box would be perfect. Over the last few months in my workshop, I've been working on and testing a new product, and now I'm proud to announce Bondi Bond, my very own CA glue. I've been using it in all of my projects with just about every type of material: wood, metal, plastic, or anything else that you can think of. It comes in 3 different thicknesses, which extends its use across many varied situations. The thin Bondi Bond is ideal for wicking into gaps and thin joints, or even stabilise soft material by soaking right into it. The medium is perfect for a general all-round adhesive. The thick Bondi Bond is great for filling voids and knots and repairing fix-ups, and I like to use it to quickly put together jigs along with the activator, which sets the bond in just a few seconds. I reckon it's a great product. Hopefully you'll give it a go, and as always, thanks for your support. That's the front done. Next I need to make a film holder fit into it. I bought a few of these 4x5 film holders off eBay. They're not essential, but they each hold 2 pieces of film, and as they're interchangeable, that will allow me to make a handful of photos rather than just loading one at a time into the back of the camera. By the way, I won't be using film, I'll be using photographic paper to expose the image directly into the camera, and the paper will need loading in the dark. I don't have a darkroom, but I'll get into that later on. There's ridges on the holder that locate nicely onto the camera body, and this will keep them locked in position. Next I'll cut the pieces for the top and bottom. One of the main things needed is to make sure that the camera is light tight with no gaps whatsoever. I made sure to get a good fit on these pieces, although they will get glued and they could be filled if needed. To give the camera a bit of a luxurious feel, I've decided to add some leather panels, and I got hold of this piece with pebble grain, which should look awesome. I'll cut a piece for the top and bottom now, using them as templates. I'll mark them and put them aside for now, then glue the top and bottom to the body, leaving a recess for the leather. Next I need a few strips for the back of the camera, which will help to keep it light tight and avoid any light leaks. The film holder will sit flat against the back, and the window is sized to match the window on the holder. There's a ridge on the film holder that needs fitting into the camera so it can sit flat. Next, I'll add a couple more strips which will secure the film holder in position. As well as putting leather on the top and the bottom, I'll also add a panel to the front, and this is going to be tricky to make a recess across the curved surface. I'm not 100% sure how this will go, but I'll try and do it on the router table. It isn't perfect, but it did an okay job. I just need to tidy it up a bit and deal with the ends, as I wasn't going to get too close. To finish the ends, I'll make another cut on the router table, and again I'll keep away from the corners and finish those with a chisel. That worked out well enough. I really wasn't sure about it, so next I'll round over the edges. Well, that was a stupid mistake. The bearing was riding above the edge in the recess. It's a good job I noticed and stopped when I did. After thinking it through, I've decided to cut that section out and glue in a piece, and fortunately it's on the bottom, so it won't be too obvious. It didn't take too long to fix, and using Bondi Bond and the activator set it in seconds so I can sand it straight away, and then I can get back to rounding over the edges. This time I thought it'd be safer to round over the edges on the sander. On the curved edges, I start by making an even chamfer, and then I'll round that out, which should come out pretty consistent. That's the woodworking done, so next I'll cut the leather for the front panel and glue it in. I reckon that looks pretty cool, so next I'll drill out the centre for the pinhole. I'm actually drilling a 50mm or 2-inch hole, and that's because I've designed an over elaborate shutter mechanism that needs to be a certain size for it to work. It'll make more sense when it comes together, and even though it's a pinhole camera, this shutter section will have a sort of lens look to it. So next I need to turn down a couple of discs on the lathe, but first I'll prepare those by cutting them out with a hole saw. I really only need one, but it needs to be tall enough to mount it into the chuck of the lathe, so I'll glue them both together. And as I want the parts to be accurate, I'm going to do it on the metal lathe. And by the way, I'll get 2 parts out of this blank. I could do this on the wood lathe, but I really like using the metal lathe for parts like this. The back of it still needs flattening off, but that's the front part done. Next I'll turn down the piece that fits behind and into the camera body. A piece of brass will get sandwiched between the 2 pieces of wood, so here I'm making a shoulder that the brass will locate onto. The shoulder's too deep and it'll need sanding down, but next I'll make the brass piece. The widest flat bar I have is 50mm, which isn't quite wide enough, so I'll solder 2 pieces together. It's not pretty, but it'll be fine with a cleanup. I need to turn it into a circle, which I'll do on the lathe, but first I'll cut out an oversized disc with a hole saw, and I'll use Bondi bond and masking tape to hold it. By the way, that was the tape adhesive on the back of the hot brass that gave way and not the CA glue. The wood still needs sanding down, but next I'll prepare and solder another piece of brass onto the ring. It's too thick, so I'll just mill it down to size and then I'll solder it on. Because I don't want to affect the first solder joints in the ring, this time I'll use low temperature solder. I'm adding flux first, and I also cut this piece off camera that needs soldering on as well. It still needs some more sanding, but that'll do for now. Next I'll drill and tap an M4 hole in the end piece, and this will be for a cable release for the shutter. Here's the cable. It has a tapered thread on the end, which I don't have a matching tap for. I filed down this section, which was also tapered, even though it wasn't threaded. Now that it's filed roughly parallel, I'll thread it to match the M4 thread that I just tapped into the brass. That's working nicely. Next I'll make the shutter with a piece of K&S 3/4 inch brass strip. The wooden ring at the front needs a recess in the back for the shutter to slide in, so I'll cut that next. I'm just eyeballing the centre, which I reckon I can get pretty close. I need to cut the recess deeper, and I realised that it was going to cut into the opening. I thought about making it thicker, but instead I'll glue a veneer to the back and I'll use a piece of ebony, which will add a bit of subtle interest and look like it was planned. The ebony wasn't quite wide enough, so I glued 2 pieces together off camera. While that's setting, I'll make a small brass post and thumb screw that will secure the inner release cable to the shutter, and to do that I'll introduce my newest toy. I've had it a couple of months, so this will be the first time I've used it other than trying it out. Now I need to make the thumb screw. I'll do that on the mini lathe again, but first I'll nail a piece of brass bar on the big lathe. Before I cut the threads, I'm making an undercut to the end of the shank, so if needed the screw will thread all the way down onto the underside of the head. Whenever I get asked what my favourite tool is, I always answer the fly press, but this is so much fun and it may have just become my new favourite. That seems pretty good. Now I'll remove some of this threaded section of cable as it's in the way and stopping the full movement of the shutter. This is a last minute addition, even though the shutter seems to be functioning fine. I don't want any chance of it dipping down and catching the inner part of the ring, so I've cut this piece of brass that I'll solder on to prevent that from happening. Now I can clean up all the parts ready for assembly. Because most of the exposures that I'll be taking will be long, there really isn't much need for the release cable. A slight nudge of a camera when opening or closing the shutter wouldn't really have any effect, but in full sunlight the exposures could come down to a few seconds where that would definitely make a difference. And I may also try shooting with film at some point, which would also be much quicker than exposing onto paper. I will polish the brass some more, but I thought I should get back to finishing the actual camera body. I'm painting with matte black on the inside to eliminate any reflections. I'm pretty sure there's no gaps, but if there were, then this would seal those up too. The Dremel did okay, but I found that fine wire wall did a much better job of polishing it evenly. Another stupid mistake, I cut that piece out on the wrong side. I'll glue a piece in and cut it again on the other side. The cable could have just come from the left, but as I'm right-handed, it makes sense for it to come from the right. I'll do a quick final sand as it's got a bit grubby with all the handling, and then I'll use some Renaissance wax to finish it. I was thinking of gluing it on, but I reckon it should be removable if needed, so I'll fix it with a couple of brass machine screws. It would be a cleaner look if it were glued, but I think these should look okay. I reckon they'll look better recessed. It would have been easier to do that before drilling them, but I should be able to line up the drill to my marks. I need to thread into the wood, but the holes fall right onto the join with the brass. I knew it was going to, but I had no choice. That's where the screws need to go, so I'll have to get around it. I'll stabilise the threads by wicking in thin Bondi bond, then I'll run the tap through again to clean the threads back up. Now for the most important part, the pinhole itself. I'm going to use brass shim, but you could also use a piece of aluminium from a drink can. The hole needs to be 0.3mm as that's the optimal size for the focal length of the camera. I'll explain that better later on, and I'll make the hole with this tiny drill bit. You can also do this just by poking the shim with a fine needle. The more accurate this is, the better the image quality will be, but it's something that could be made again and changed if needed. To take a better look at the pinhole, I'll put it on a light that's set very dim and measure it against the ruler. From my research, it needs to be close, but it's not worth being too pedantic. It looks pretty close to 1/3 of a millimetre to me, so I'll go with that, and it'd only take 2 minutes to make another one if I need to. Here I'm measuring the focal length, which is from the film plane to the position of the pinhole. I'll call that 54 millimeters, and using an online pinhole calculator, which gave me the optimal pinhole size of 0.3 millimeters, but also gave me the f-stop of my camera, which is f180, so now I can use that to work out exposure times. There's a couple more things that I'll get through quickly before I try it out. I need a couple of thumb screws to secure the film holder tight against the camera. As the holes for the screws are close to the edge of the back strips, I've clamped a piece of wood to help support the edge and stop the drill from breaking through. I'll add strips of sticky back velvet to the back recess of the camera to further secure it from light leaks. And here's the last thing, a tripod mount. I reckon it looks awesome, and even though you don't hold onto the camera to take photos, it still feels great to hold with the leather panels. I lied, there's one last thing. I made a wooden disc to block out the amount of brass around the pinhole. As I mentioned earlier, I don't have a dark room, but I do have this room at the back of my workshop. It used to be a clean room where I used to make picture frames, and it won't take too much to block out the light. There's a door and a window across the back and a window into the workshop. I reckon if you had nowhere else, it wouldn't be too difficult to set up a dark room in a small bathroom. I'm ready to cut some paper and load a film holder, and that has to be done under red light, which won't affect the light sensitive paper. As it's evening and dark outside, I'll take a photo of my workshop. I'm using an app that gives me an approximation of the view and also the exposure time, which is 1 hour and 20 minutes. I'm removing the dark slide, then opening the shutter, and there it is. I'll go and have dinner and come back when it's done. Fingers crossed that there'll be some sort of image. Here's what I'm using to develop the image, so let's see how it goes. This is 4 times speed, and you can see there's something there. I'm not sure what the ring is in the middle. And by the way, if you don't already know, this is a negative image which I'll have to use to make a positive from. This is developed by inspection. When I feel like it's done, I take it out of the developer. I put it in the stop bath for about 20 seconds or so before putting it into the fixer for a minute. Now the chemicals need washing off in water. I did take it to a tap as well afterwards, but there it is. There's my first image. There's a couple of ways to get a positive image. It can be scanned, then inverted in software, and then you have a digital copy which can be printed out. The other way is developing a contact print, and that's made directly from the paper negative. The next morning I went around the place and took a few more. They came out pretty cool. Every one of them worked, even though I do need to nail the exposures better. But I'm looking forward to taking many more, and hopefully I'll get there. Here's a few of the images that were scanned and inverted. The last one had the same effect as the first workshop one with the ring, and I realised with that one, as soon as it was inverted, it was just flared due to the camera facing a bright light. And I'll quickly have a go at contact printing from the negative. I put a fresh piece of paper down with the emulsion side facing up, and then place a negative over it with a piece of glass on top, and then I expose it to light just for a few seconds and then develop it. I really find it amazing that the light can penetrate the negative and do it with such great detail. I reckon they look great. They have so much character and way more interesting than a digital photo. This was so much fun, and I think I may be hooked. Anyway, it was an awesome project. Hopefully you enjoyed it too. Don't forget to check out Bondi Bond. There's a link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.